A young rabbi was about to enter her first round of high holidays in a brand new congregation. And the president of the board, who had also been the chair of her search committee, by the way, asked her, "So, Rabbi, what are you going to talk about?" The rabbi said, I thought I'd talk about Shabbos, the beauty and the importance of observing Shabbat. Too controversial. Nobody in this community keeps Shabbat. We can't do that. Well then, I thought maybe I'd speak about kashrut, about, the importance, the sanctity of keeping a kosher. No way, Rabbi, no, that's even worse. No one keeps kosher in this community. Well, what should I speak about? Speak about Judaism. So later on, the young rabbi comes back and says, perhaps I should speak about anti-Semitism or the moral complexity of the Middle East conflict. No, that's way too controversial. Speak about Judaism. Maybe speak about Shabbat. I'm glad there's some laughter. And by the way, I've never had a board president ask me what I'm talking about. Rabbis, young and old, across all denominations and across the world, have been agonizing this year about what messages to give on these Yamim Noraim, on these days of awe, after such a deeply painful year that has left us heartbroken, afraid, deeply divided, and filled with anguish for our future here in Israel and really throughout the world. Amidst the very real grief in the wake of the horrific anti-Semitic attack here in Boulder and the devastating loss of our beloved Karen Diamond, and those in our community, some of whom are here with long journeys of healing from the physical and emotional scars from that awful day. Amidst the grim reality of increased global anti-Semitism, including here in Boulder, downtown, and in our city council chambers, our safety as Jews here and everywhere has been called into question. Amidst the horror of the fact that there are still 48 hostages dead and alive in tunnels in Gaza after 2 years, and the horror that this bloody, catastrophic war is still continuing with way too many people suffering and dying, I'd so deeply hoped that by this Rosh Hashanah, all the hostages would be freed and there would be some kind of peace, or at least a ceasefire. Amidst continuing gun violence in our schools, including just 2 weeks ago, here in Evergreen, Colorado, and the fatal political shooting of Charlie Kirk, and the response and crackdown against anyone who had ever criticized him, although I do hear that Jimmy Kimmel is back on air tomorrow night, or tonight actually. Amidst the terrifying changes that we're seeing in this country, immigration, US foreign aid, amidst all of this intense heartbreak, most of which is definitely too controversial to speak about for young and old rabbis. Amidst it all, there is so much shouting, so many truths competing to be heard. How can we possibly hear it all? There's a rabbinic midrash that I learned earlier this year from Rabbi Michael Rosenberg of Hadar that talks about this idea, and talks about the idea that human beings are so different to God. Shelo kamidat basar v'dam midat hakodesh. The qualities of human beings are not like the qualities of the divine. Midat basar v'dam eino yachol lomar shnei dvarim ka'achad. Human beings can't say two things at the same time. Aval mi she'amar v'haya ha'olam amar aseret hadibrot b'dibur echad. But the one who spoke the world into being somehow was able to speak all 10 of the 10 commandments in one utterance. Midat basar v'dam eino yachol. The qualities of a human being are not like God. Eino yachol lishmoa mishnei v'nei adam kashehem tzoakim ke'achad. Human beings can't possibly hear two different voices that are crying out at the same time. Haval, the one who spoke the world into being, can hear, if the whole world is crying out at the same time, can hear all of those cries. As it says, the one who hears prayers, all flesh will come before you. There has been so much crying out from so many different directions, sometimes multiple voices shouting over each other in a way that is impossible to hear or to discern what is true amidst all of the noise. That midrash, that rabbinic teaching, is about, in part, what we heard at the revelation of Mount Sinai, with God's voice speaking all 10 of the 10 commandments at once, and the challenge of being able to distinguish any of it with clarity. If our limitations as humans prevent us from hearing these heavenly messages and instructions, how much more difficult is it to discern truth from the multiplicity of human voices that are trying to get our attention? There's another rabbinic story, a midrash, and it's not the first time I'm quoting it here, and I'm sure it won't be the last because it's a beautiful story. The premise of the story is that when God is setting out to create the human being on the 6th day of creation, the angels in heaven are very much in dissent and argument with each other. The angels get together and fiercely debate whether it's a good idea or not to create the human being. The angel of chesed, compassion, loving kindness, partners with the angel Emet, the angel of truth. Chesed says, yes, let's create the human being, Adam, for they'll bring great acts of loving kindness into the world. No, said Emet, the angel of truth. The human being will bring lies and deceptions into the world. Meanwhile, in another corner of heaven, the angel Tzedek, the angel of justice or righteousness, got together with the angel of Shalom, the angel of peace. Yes, said Tzedek. What a great idea. Humanity will bring so much justice to this world. No, said Shalom. Don't do it. People will just create war and bloodshed and disagreement. God took the angel of Emet, the angel of truth, and threw her to the ground while the other angels continued their arguing. And God said, why are you still debating? It's too late. Adam, the first human being, has already been created. There's so much in this charming story and its underlying hope that loving kindness and truth and justice and peace will or should be implanted in humanity. Yet for me, the most intriguing part of the story is God's act of throwing Emet, throwing truth to the ground. The Hasidic master Menachem Mendel of Kotz, known as the Kotzker Rebbe, asks, what is the advantage of casting aside truth while peace remains, when both of them argued against creating humanity? The Kotzker answers his own question and says, when we cast aside truth, peace will prevail. The root of argument is that everyone fights for their own truth, but when we push truth aside, there's no longer something about which to disagree. Thus, there's no argument, and peace has no claim to make. Is that teaching a naive fantasy, or is it a strategic possibility? If we are willing to let go, even partially, of our insistence that our narrative is the only one, could that bring peace? Interpersonally, and even maybe globally? Not only are we incapable of hearing with clarity anything from all of the noise, we've also lost the ability to listen and to speak to those whose views are opposed to our own. In his book, The Dignity of Difference, Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sachs, says, truth on earth is not, nor can be, the whole truth. In heaven there is truth, on earth there are truths. Some of you know that I'll be playing Tevye at the end of January in Fiddler on the Roof. Some of the other cast members are here in the room. And there's a beautiful scene early on in the play where there is a dispute, and somehow Tevye has said, you're right, and you're right. And then Avram says, wait a minute, Avram's the baker, a small but important part. And he says, wait, he's right and he's right. They can't both be right. To which Tevye says, you know, you're also right. Before I go too deeply down this tack, which may make some of you very uncomfortable, I will acknowledge that there are limits. And mine might well be different to some of yours. The Hamas attack on October 7th was unspeakably evil, and Hamas continues to seek the destruction of Israel and Jews everywhere. The state of Israel has a right to exist. I'm a Zionist rabbi in a Zionist congregation, in a Zionist movement, and there has been tremendous suffering, devastation, and loss of life among Palestinian civilians, including many children, and some of it is definitely avoidable. The violence perpetrated by extremist Jewish settlers in the West Bank and in other places that has been sanctioned by parts of the Israeli government is terrorism. These, for me, are truths, and may not be for all of you, yet within these parameters there are multiple narratives that can, and in my view must, coexist. If not, we will simply stop being in any relationship with those with whom we disagree and push out and cancel opposition in ways that are contrary to both democratic and rabbinic values. In a blog post earlier this month, a pre-Rosh Hashanah blog that was written in the Times of Israel by Yossi Klein Halevi, he says, those of us who love Israel must not forfeit the moral conversation to Jews who have despaired of Israel or who openly side with our enemies. He continues later on in that blog post, I fear those Jews without ambivalence who, no matter how wrenching the dilemma, always offer a simple narrative that resolves our inner conflicts, especially now as we face some of the most morally complicated dilemmas in our history. Those one-dimensional voices must not be allowed to determine Jewish discourse. In talking about Jews without ambivalence, Yossi Klein Halevi, who some of us here know, he's been to Colorado several times. His voice, I think, has been very important throughout this awful war. And he's warning of the dangers of not seeing nuance. We desperately need a non-binary approach to all of this. And the point of not allowing one-dimensional voices to determine Jewish discourse is so important and so fundamentally Jewish. By the way, Rabbi Chana in November is going to be moderating a panel where we are talking about how we can approach this in a non-binary way. It can be excruciatingly hard to hold a middle position amidst the screaming on the edges. So many Jewish communities, frankly including ours, across the world have experienced rupture, have experienced some version of this divisiveness that has ripped people apart and in some cases ended relationships. My good friend in London, John Boyd, who is the executive director of the Institute for Jewish Policy Research, has talked about Masorti, or conservative Judaism, as living on the seams, like a seam of a garment, which is the most vulnerable part, and yet it's what holds it all together. He speaks of Masorti Judaism, which is what the conservative movement is called in Israel, the UK, and Europe. And he wrote this to me. It was in a WhatsApp message. He said, Masorti Jews tend to sit on the seam between modern Orthodoxy and more progressive forms of Judaism. Modern Orthodox Jews tend to see supporting Israel as a more important component of their Jewishness than a broader sense of supporting social justice causes as a whole. Progressive Jews often tend to be the opposite. So Masorti Jews comprise both of these, meaning that tensions between some people's fundamental gut collective support for Israel and others' fundamental gut collective support for Palestinian rights are particularly likely to play themselves out in Masorti circles. Or put another way, any tensions between the more particularist and more universalist elements of Judaism are especially likely to be exposed in Masorti circles. In that sense, he says, we live on the seam, and seams are both the weakest point in a garment, i.e. the part that is most likely to split when under tension, and the part that holds the whole garment together. That's the role, he says, Masorti Jews play in the Jewish people. We are particularly likely to experience these types of tensions in our midst. But if we can figure out how to hold ourselves together, we are potentially figuring out how to hold the Jewish people together as a whole. I have definitely felt like that vulnerable seam recently in this community, stretched to the point of ripping as two opposite sides scream their narratives. If we want the garment to be whole, we do need it all. Obviously, there's no seam without the materials on either of its sides. And I would add to my friend John's metaphor that when a garment is ripped along a seam, it's actually much easier to repair than when the fabric itself is torn. The real challenge, and it is an enormous challenge, is within defined limits to hold opposite narratives both as truths. Elie Wiesel is often attributed with the quote, "Trust those who seek the truth, distrust those who have found it." What would the world be like if we all saw ourselves as seekers of truth, having the humility and curiosity to be on that path of inquiry rather than claiming to have and to know with certainty the truth? Uppercase T. That uppercase T truth is a fallen angel down here on earth for us to wrestle with. Look, there are plenty of horrible, distorted lies and propaganda out there posing as truth that we can and should absolutely dismiss. In a medieval midrash called Pesikta de Rabbati, Rabbi Shmuel ben Nachmani says, "Matzinu she'akol bara kadosh baruch hu b'olomo chutz mimidat shecher umidat shav." He says that we have found that everything in the entire world was created by the Holy One except lies and exaggeration, which were not God's doing, as people devised those on their own. Without knowing what is really true so much of the time, it's okay sometimes to have doubt rather than certainty. In fact, it's an imperative. The night before that horrific hate crime on the run for their lives walk on Pearl Street that took Karen's life, the Jerusalem Youth Chorus performed a concert in Boulder. Young Israelis and Palestinians, Jews, Muslims, and Christians, connected through beautiful music, shared their painful stories between the songs, and showed their commitment to hearing each other's narratives, however different it was to their own. In spite of the deep pain and division in the world, this was a tremendously hopeful evening and a tiny taste of what might be possible. It is so desperately sad that the bubble burst for many of us the very next day in the deadly flames of that attack. I have so much rage for what Hamas did on October 7th and what they continue to do today in fanning the flames of hatred. And I'm also angry that they have stolen, for many of us, the hope and the compassion of many Israelis and many Jews who are unable fully to grasp or hold the human tragedy in Gaza, those who claim that there are no innocent Palestinians. Itai Fleischer, an Israeli-Australian Zionist peace activist, wrote a book earlier this year called "The Holy and the Broken, a Cry for Israeli-Palestinian Peace from a Land That Must Be Shared." It's a hard book to read, but its essence is to share the very different narratives of two people since the conflict began. Itai is the education director of Kids for Peace Jerusalem, an interfaith youth movement for Israelis and Palestinians. The book is both comforting and extremely troubling and challenges its readers to embrace moments of both holiness and brokenness. He shares in the book a meme that was going around in some circles post-October 7th that reads, "It's okay to be heartbroken for more than one group of people at the same time." Is it okay? Is it even possible? I hope so. Even now, I hope so. It's definitely not easy, and it certainly does not mean that we create moral equivalence where there is none, nor that we compromise the values that are most important to us. But sometimes we do need to cast our angel of truth aside for the greater possibility of a greater peace. Not just for us, for all humanity. Governments and leaders perpetually disappoint us and lie to us, and in spite of the horrors, there are grassroots initiatives like Root, Shorashim, Jidur in the West Bank, Jerusalem Youth Chorus, Kids for Peace that I've mentioned, the Arava Institute in the southern Negev, and SIP, Sustainable Israeli-Palestine Projects, that was founded right here in Boulder by the Orensteins. And these organizations give me hope beyond the binary narratives that pull us, and in spite of how far away we seem to be from really understanding one another. Those other angels, Chesed, Tzedek, and Shalom, loving kindness, compassion, righteousness, and peace, they hope that these qualities can be within each of us. I had the opportunity to meet with Karen Diamond just a few days before she died of her horrific burns, and somehow she was still able to embody so much love and so much compassion, and was able to tell me and her family that the way to respond to the horrors of June 1st was not with more hate, but with love and with compassion. As Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. put it, darkness cannot drive out darkness, only light can do that. Hate cannot drive out hate, only love can do that. I hope that Karen will always be remembered for how she lived and not how she died, and that she will be an inspiration for us all. Let's make her memory a blessing by our own commitment to live the promise of those angels. As we look forward to a future in a new spiritual home over there, how can we imagine ourselves as a Kehila Kadosha, a sacred community where we can hold the best intentions toward each other, regardless of whether we agree or disagree on fundamental issues, and can listen compassionately with deep respect for each other across our differences, recognizing that within agreed limits, there are multiple truths. We are a people on the seam, which is both a powerful and a fragile place to be. Rosh Hashanah, Hayom Harat Olam, a day pregnant with possibility, pregnant with eternity, is a celebration of the creation of the human being, and humanity is really, really hurting right now. As the rabbinic midrash quoted earlier says, unlike the Holy One, most of us do not have the capacity to hear all the cries and screams at once. But perhaps the primal, non-verbal sounds of the shofar, which weeps and wails along with us, can do something that words cannot. Penetrate our hearts and attune us to the world's cries and be heard in the tunnels of Gaza and everywhere where people suffer, and pierce the heavens to turn all of the harsh decrees into sweet blessings of healing and of wholeness. Shana Tova.